3 men don't usually ride up to your ranch at dusk unless they want something taken, or something settled. But when Elias Mercer saw the 4th horse crest the low ridge behind them, black, expensive, restless, he knew this wasn't just business. This was judgment arriving early. Elias stood on the porch of his weather-beaten ranch house, one hand resting on the rail worn smooth by years of waiting. The sun was sinking behind the plains, painting the tall grass in copper and blood orange, and the wind carried the smell of dust and old hay. His cattle had gone quiet. Even the cicadas seemed to know better than to make noise. The men reined in a few yards short. Boots hit the dirt. The man on the black horse stayed mounted. She's inside? One of the others asked, not looking at Elias. His voice carried the hard edge of someone who believed the answer didn't matter. Elias didn't answer right away. He looked past them, out toward the wide, empty land he'd fought to keep. Then he said, evenly, she's where she chose to be. That was when the man on the black horse finally dismounted. Silas Crow had changed. His coat was tailored, his boots polished, his face fuller than Elias remembered. Gold glinted at his vest. Money had softened nothing but the lines around his mouth, which were now carved into a permanent smirk. You always did like to make things difficult, Eli. Silas said, even when you know how they'll end. Elias felt his jaw tighten, but his voice stayed low. Let's go back to where this started. Years earlier. The land had been younger, and so had they. Back then. Elias Mercer was just a ranch hand with rough palms and a quiet way of standing in the background. He worked Silas Crow's father's land from sunup to dark, mending fences, breaking horses, fixing what richer men broke without noticing. Silas had been there too, laughing loud, dreaming bigger than the horizon. Always certain the world owed him more than dirt and sweat. And then there was Clara. She arrived one spring with a single trunk and a dress too thin for frontier nights. She was Silas's distant cousin, or so the story went, sent west to learn restraint, to wait out some scandal back east. She couldn't have been more than 17. Her hands were soft, her eyes sharp with questions she didn't yet know how to ask. Elias remembered the first time she spoke to him. Not flirtation, not pity, just curiosity. Does it ever end? She asked, nodding toward the endless stretch of land. Not if you're paying attention, he'd said. She smiled at that, like she'd found something worth keeping. They started talking in the quiet spaces by the water trough, near the fence line, under skies so wide they made promises feel small. Elias never touched her, never crossed that line. He watched her grow older in the way the frontier forced people to faster than kindness allowed. One evening, after a long day and a longer silence between them, Elias finally said what he'd been holding back. I'd marry you, he said, plain and honest like everything else in his life. If you'd have me. Clara didn't laugh. She didn't blush. She looked down at her hands, twisting the fabric of her dress like it might tear. I'm too young, she said softly. I don't even know who I am yet. The words weren't cruel. They were careful. Still, they landed heavy. Elias nodded once. Then I'll stop asking. And he did. A year later, Silas announced his engagement. Clara stood beside him in lace she hadn't chosen, her smile practiced, her eyes distant. The wedding was loud. Elias didn't attend. Time moved the way it always does, slow until it wasn't. Silas inherited money. Clara inherited loneliness. Elias bought a small stretch of land far from town and built something solid with his own hands. And now, years later, she stood inside his house again. Elias could hear her moving behind the door, soft footsteps, the faint creak of floorboards. She hadn't come riding in a carriage. She'd come alone, dusty, tired, older. Silas took a step forward. You think because she ran to you, you get to decide? Elias met his eyes. She said she's too young once, he replied quietly. Turns out, she was just waiting to choose. The wind picked up. The sky darkened, and somewhere beyond the ranch, a decision made long ago began to demand its price. The next morning didn't bring relief. It brought eyes. They came early, neighbors riding slow past Elias Mercer's fence line, lingering longer than necessary, pretending to check their cinches or count cattle that weren't theirs. News traveled fast on the frontier, especially when it involved a woman with a wealthy husband and a poor rancher with a quiet reputation. By noon, the town knew Clara Crow was staying under Elias's roof, inside the house. The air smelled of coffee and wood smoke. Clara sat at the small table near the window, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug. She wore one of Elias's spare shirts, sleeves rolled, hair loosely tied back. There was no shame in her posture, only exhaustion. Elias stood near the sink, rinsing his cup longer than necessary. He hadn't slept. Every creak of the night had felt like a warning. You don't have to stay, he said finally, not turning around. Town's 10 miles south. Folks won't ask questions there. Clara shook her head. They always ask questions. They just don't always want answers. She looked up at him then, really looked. The years had added lines to his face, but they'd also carved something steadier into him. She seemed smaller by comparison, not weak, just worn thin by rooms too large and voices that never listened. He'll come back, Elias said. Silas doesn't like being told no. I didn't say no, she replied. I said I needed time. Elias turned, leaning against the counter. That's the same thing to men like him. Outside, a horse snorted. Elias moved to the door, opening it just enough to see who'd arrived. It was Mrs. Calder, widowed, sharp-eyed, known for knowing everyone's business before they did. She stayed mounted, hands folded neat on the reins. Morning, Eli, she said. Her gaze slid past him into the house. Heard you had company. Elias didn't move aside. I do. Mrs. Calder tilted her head. That's brave. Or foolish. Sometimes it's the same thing. She studied him a moment longer, then sighed. Silas Crow rode through town last night. He's talking, not shouting. That's worse. Clara stepped into view behind Elias. Mrs. Calder's eyes softened just a little. You look tired, child, she said. Clara nodded. I am. Mrs. Calder hesitated, then leaned forward in her saddle. Men are already choosing sides. Sheriff doesn't want trouble, but he won't cross Silas. Not with that kind of money. Elias felt the weight settle in his chest. What would you do? He asked. Mrs. Calder met his eyes. I do what lets me sleep at night. Then she turned her horse and rode away. By afternoon, Elias rode into town for supplies. He could feel the shift before anyone spoke, the way conversations dulled as he passed, the way doors closed just a little faster. At the general store, two men fell silent when he entered. You planning to keep her? One finally asked, not unkind, just curious in the way that stripped dignity away. Elias set his purchases on the counter. She's not livestock. A low murmur followed him as he left. On the ride back, dust rose behind him. Hoofbeats. He slowed, letting the rider catch up. It was Sheriff Hale, hat pulled low, expression tired. I'm not here to threaten you, Hale said, just to warn. Elias nodded. I figured. Silas claims you're harboring his wife against her will. That true? Elias asked. Hale hesitated. That what he's saying? Elias's grip tightened on the reins. She walked here. I believe you, Hale said quietly. But belief don't hold much weight when money starts talking. They rode in silence a while. You could ask her to leave, Hale said at last. That would settle it. Elias stopped his horse. And if she doesn't want to? Hale looked at him. Then you're choosing trouble. When Elias returned home, Clara was in the yard, hanging laundry on the line. The sun caught in her hair, and for a moment she looked almost like the girl she'd been, before choices hardened into consequences. Asterisk, she saw his face and knew. Asterisk, they're pressuring you. She said. Asterisk, yes. Asterisk, she stepped closer. I won't ruin what you built. Asterisk, Elias shook his head. You didn't come here to be protected from rumors. You came because you trusted me. Asterisk, her voice wavered. I didn't know where else to go. Asterisk, he looked out across his land, at the fences he'd raised board by board. Then he looked back at her. Asterisk, you can stay, he said, but it won't be quiet. Asterisk, Clara swallowed. I can live with noise. I couldn't live with silence anymore. Asterisk, as dusk fell, a rider appeared on the far ridge watching. Asterisk, the frontier had noticed. Asterisk, and it was deciding what to do next. The first sign of danger wasn't the rider on the ridge. Asterisk, it was the stillness. Asterisk, no birds stirred in the cottonwoods that lined the creek. The cattle clustered tight, heads low, tails flicking without reason. Elias felt it in the way his horse shifted beneath him, uneasy, as if the ground itself had learned to listen. Asterisk, by nightfall, lanterns glowed in 3 directions beyond the ranch fence. Asterisk, not close, not yet. Asterisk, Clara stood at the window, fingers resting against the glass. She hadn't spoken since sunset. Elias didn't ask her to. Some truths needed time to gather the courage to exist. Asterisk, you should sleep, he said. Asterisk, she shook her head. If I close my eyes, I'll hear him. Asterisk, Elias knew who she meant. Asterisk, he stepped onto the porch, lantern in hand. The wind carried voices low, measured, careful. Men who didn't want to be overheard but wanted their presence felt. He counted shapes in the dark. 4. Then more farther back. Asterisk, by midnight, they stopped pretending. Asterisk, Silas Crow rode up alone this time, stopping just beyond the fence line. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He waited. Asterisk, Elias walked out to meet him, stopping at the gate. The lantern cast long shadows, stretching them into something larger than men. Asterisk, she's my wife. Silas said calmly. You don't get to rewrite that. Asterisk, Elias rested his arms on the gate. Marriage doesn't make ownership. Asterisk, Silas smiled thinly. That's a dangerous idea out here. Asterisk, only to men afraid of losing what they never earned. Asterisk, Silas's eyes flicked toward the house. She told you why she left? Asterisk, Elias didn't answer. Asterisk, she gets restless. Silas continued. Always has. Thinks hardship is romantic. Thinks suffering means depth. Asterisk, Elias leaned closer. You done? Asterisk, Silas's smile faded. You think you're protecting her, but all you're doing is turning her into a cause, and causes get people hurt. Asterisk, from the shadows, another man shifted. A rifle but tapped dirt. Asterisk, Silas raised a hand, not looking back. Tomorrow morning, he said, she walks back with me, or I stop being patient. Asterisk, he turned and rode away. Asterisk, inside, Clara had heard everything. Asterisk, I'll go, she said before Elias could speak. This isn't your fight. Asterisk, Elias shook his head. It became mine the moment he rode up armed and polite. Asterisk, she paced the room, hands trembling. You don't understand him. He doesn't lose. He buys. Asterisk, Elias watched her carefully. Then why did you come here? Asterisk, she stopped. Tears welled, but she didn't let them fall. Because you never tried to own me. Asterisk, outside, hoofbeats returned, this time many. Circling but not closing in. Neighbors. Men from town. Some curious. Some loyal to Silas's money. Some just afraid. Asterisk, at dawn, Sheriff Hale arrived alone. He dismounted slow, eyes scanning the gathered men. Asterisk, this doesn't end well, he said quietly to Elias. Mobs forming, whether anyone calls it that or not. Asterisk, Elias nodded. What do you need from me? Asterisk, Hale hesitated. I need you to make this small. Asterisk, Elias glanced back at the house. Clara stood in the doorway, shoulders squared, face pale but steady. Asterisk, Silas rode forward again. This time flanked. He stopped close enough for dust to settle on Elias's boots. Asterisk, last chance, Silas said. You let her come with me, or I let people decide for you. Asterisk, Elias felt the weight of every eye. Every expectation. The frontier didn't care about right. It cared about order. He turned to Clara. She met his gaze. No fear now. Just resolve. I won't go back, she said clearly. Not with him. A murmur rippled through the men. Silas's jaw tightened. You're embarrassing yourself. Clara stepped forward. You embarrassed me for years. Silas's hand twitched near his belt. Sheriff Hale shifted his stance. Elias moved between them, slow and deliberate. She made her choice, he said. Now you make yours. The wind picked up, carrying dust and the sound of leather creaking. No one drew a weapon. No one backed down. The frontier held its breath. And in that silence, the cost of kindness stood fully revealed, waiting to be paid by whoever blinked first. The silence didn't break all at once. It thinned like ice under a careful step. Clara was the first to move. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look at the men ringed around the yard. She walked to the small table just inside the door and picked something up. A folded piece of paper, creased and softened by time. She held it in both hands as if it might slip away. This is what I brought with me, she said, stepping back into the open. Not his money. Not his name. Silas scoffed. Put that away. She ignored him. It's a letter, she continued, her voice steady but low. From the doctor in St. Louis, the one you paid not to speak. A ripple passed through the crowd. Sheriff Hale straightened. Clara looked at Elias then, just once, as if asking permission without words. He nodded. He said, I wouldn't have children, she said. Said it quiet, like it was something shameful. You knew before we married. You let everyone think it was my fault we never had a family. Silas's face hardened. That's private. So was my grief, she replied. She turned to the men watching. I lived in rooms full of silver and never heard my own voice. Every kindness was measured. Every mistake remembered. She held the letter out toward Elias. He didn't take it. He didn't need to. I came here because once a man asked for my hand and didn't demand an answer. She said, he let me be young. Let me be afraid. He didn't punish me for it. The wind stirred her hair. Elias could see her hands shaking now, but she didn't stop. Silas stepped forward. You think telling them this changes anything? She met his gaze. It changes me. For a moment, it looked like Silas might strike her. Instead, he laughed a sharp, brittle sound. You choose this? He said, gesturing at the ranch. Dust scraps? A man who can barely keep a fence standing. Elias spoke then, quiet but firm. Enough. Silas rounded on him. You think this is noble? You think taking in a married woman makes you righteous? Elias didn't raise his voice. No. I think letting her speak does. One of the men near the fence shifted uncomfortably. Another looked away. Mrs. Calder had returned at some point. She stood with her arms folded, eyes narrowed. Sheriff Hale cleared his throat. Clara, he said gently, if you stay, this won't end today. I know, she replied. And if you go back? Hale asked. She looked at Silas. Then it already has. Silas exhaled slowly, weighing something unseen. You'll regret this, he said. Both of you. He turned to the men behind him. We're leaving. A few hesitated. Money tugged one way. Something older tugged another. One by one, they mounted up. Silas paused at the edge of the yard. You always did like lost cousins, Eli. Elias met his eyes. Only when they're people. When the last rider disappeared, the yard felt too large to quiet. Clara sank onto the porch steps, the strength finally leaving her legs. Elias sat beside her. Close but not touching. I didn't plan that, she said, staring out at the land. I just couldn't be quiet anymore. You don't have to explain, he replied. She laughed softly. a sound half broken, half free. I thought kindness was loud. Turns out it's just space. Asterisk. They sat there as the sun climbed, light warming the boards beneath them. No one spoke. Asterisk. Later, Elias brought out his most prized possession, a small tintype photograph, edges worn smooth. It showed a younger man and woman standing stiffly beside a half-built house. His parents, gone too soon. Asterisk. I keep it to remember what lasts, he said, setting it between them. Asterisk. Clara studied it, then looked at him. You risked everything. Asterisk. Elias shrugged. Some things are worth the noise. Asterisk. In the distance, a hawk circled, unbothered by human choices. The frontier moved on, as it always did. Asterisk. But something here had shifted. Asterisk. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Asterisk. Just enough to change the shape of tomorrow. Morning came without ceremony. Asterisk. The sky lightened slowly, pale and wide, the way it always had. No riders returned in the night. No gunshots echoed from the hills. The frontier, having leaned close to see what blood might spill, lost interest when none was offered. Asterisk. Elias was already up when Clara stepped onto the porch. He was mending a broken hinge, movements steady, familiar. Life work. Honest work. The kind that asked nothing but time. Asterisk. For a moment, she just watched him. Asterisk. You don't owe me anything, she said finally. Asterisk. Elias didn't look up. I know. Asterisk. That wasn't an invitation. Asterisk. He smiled faintly, still focused on the hinge. Good. Asterisk. They shared a quiet breakfast. No promises. No declarations. Just the scrape of plates, the sound of coffee being poured. The soft settling of something long unsettled. Asterisk. By midday, Sheriff Hale returned, this time without tension in his shoulders. Asterisk. Silas filed his complaint. He said, then withdrew it. Asterisk. Clara stiffened. Why? Asterisk. Hale adjusted his hat. Because the letter you mentioned? Mrs. Calder rode to town with a copy. Funny thing about truth. Once it's spoken out loud, it stops being a secret and starts being a risk. Asterisk. He looked at Clara. You're free to go where you please. Law won't stop you. Asterisk. She nodded, absorbing the words like someone learning a new language. Asterisk. Silas left the territory a week later. Some said back east. Some said south. His mansion stood empty, big and echoing, already beginning to decay under its own weight. Money could buy walls, but it couldn't teach them how to hold warmth. Asterisk. Clara stayed. Asterisk. Not as a wife. Not at first. Asterisk. She worked alongside Elias, learned the land the way he had by listening to it. She mended clothes, learned to ride hard miles, learned which silences meant peace and which meant warning. People in town talked for a while. Then something else happened. Crops needed tending. Children got sick. Winter came. Asterisk. Time did what arguments, COULDN single quotes T. Asterisk. One evening, months later, they sat on the porch again, the same place where judgment had once stood waiting. Asterisk. I used to think choosing was selfish. Clara said, turns out, not choosing nearly destroyed me. Asterisk. Elias nodded. Most folks don't regret the roads they take. They regret the ones they let others choose for them. Asterisk. She looked at him then. I don't want saving. Asterisk. I know. Asterisk. I want standing beside. Asterisk. He met her gaze. I can do that. Asterisk. They didn't marry quickly. The frontier had seen too many fast promises. When they did, it was small. No lace, no speeches, just witnesses who understood what it meant to wait. Asterisk. Years passed. Asterisk. The ranch grew steadier, not richer. Clara became known as a woman who listened before she spoke. When disputes arose, people asked her to sit in, not because she was loud, but because she remembered what silence could cost. Asterisk. Sometimes travelers asked about the empty mansion down the road. Clara would glance toward it, then back to the land beneath her feet. Asterisk. Some houses are built to be seen, she'd say. Others are built to be lived in. Asterisk. On certain evenings, Elias still took out the old tintype and set it on the table. Clara would touch it gently, then add something beside it, a pressed flower, a folded note. A moment preserved. Asterisk, the frontier never stopped being hard, but it softened where it could. Asterisk, and long after Silas Crow's name faded into rumor, people remembered something else instead. Asterisk, they remembered the rancher who didn't demand an answer. Asterisk, and the woman who finally gave herself one.